Professor Kerry Mullis is one of the most unique minds in America. He won the Nobel Prize. We did this interview late at night at his home on the ocean.
Inventing the AIDS virus. Here's a man, the fair-haired scientist who was considered a poster boy of science, right?
California Scientist of the Year in 1974, I think it was.
And now he's a pariah.
Not in this house.
No, but in this state and in that university, because when I filmed him in his laboratory 3 years ago, the laboratory had no funding. Now he doesn't even have that laboratory.
I know. They've made it.
And he was tenured.
Him basically.
He was tenured.
Yeah. Oh, tenured, and also one of the most brilliant people in, surely the most brilliant virologist, possibly the most brilliant, molecular biologist around. Peter is a very scholarly person in addition to being brilliant too. He's very careful. He doesn't say anything that he can't support, or usually. I mean, you can catch him in a weak moment and he might say something that he can't support. But he was a really well thought of guy too because of his ideas. The whole field, I mean, in cancer, he's the guy that led him into the whole oncogene thing, Big research bonanza. Anybody who could order a little kit from some company and hire a couple of technicians could be a cancer researcher because of things that Peter opened up. And then Peter said, no, I don't think that's actually the cause of cancer. And that made those guys a little bit angry. And then he comes along and does the same thing for AIDS. He says, I think we're on the wrong track here. And for some reason, the second time, it was almost like nobody even had to argue with him. Oh, it's just Peter again, ruining our fun, telling us that all this easy research stuff that we know we can do now for years, and the American people will pay for it, that we shouldn't be doing that. And Peter did that again. He did that twice. We need a lot more Peters.
The media will not quote him without having a challenge quote.
Yeah.
Where there was a time when whatever he said was, like any other major scientist, would have been accepted on its face value. Now he is considered the controversial. They always preface the controversial, ex-professor.
Nature states just over and over again, if Peter Duesberg can be shown to be an idiot, then HIV causes AIDS. That's what the argument comes down to in a lot of the media. It's just, it has nothing to do with, they don't talk about, the issues at all. Nobody has ever come up with the arguments that need to be brought up to decide whether HIV has any effect on anything or
But
not.
let's just look at a few of those arguments for a few moments. If they are right, they meaning the NIH, NCI, Gallo, Fauci, if they're right, then their predictions should be right also, that we would have a pandemic worldwide, an epidemic in America, an infectious disease, sexually transmitted, that hetero and homosexual equally be susceptible to. That's their first argument. Based upon that, everybody got terrified. You mean we could get sex, have sex and get AIDS and die? Then we put the big chill on promiscuity in any form, and then we started making accusations about who caused this and then started blaming. Has any of those initial predictions come true?
Well, HIV, according to the CDC, if you look at and this is, anybody can buy the annual medical yearbook from Britannica, $39 or something like that, and look in there and see. And there's always an article in there about AIDS, and it's usually there's somebody from CDC giving a number, saying here's the number of North Americans infected with this virus. The articles usually preface, the headlines is HIV spreads into some new area, right? Spreads into heterosexuals, spreads into women, spreads into teenagers. But the number has always been the same since they started measuring it and estimating the number of North Americans infected by this virus. It has remained constant at approximately 1 million for 10 years. That is not an epidemic.
Now it's
okay. They had to drop it because they had realized all the false positives were starting to really mount up when they got into a population that did not have a lot of positives, and then the false positives become predominant. And you know what? This is the craziest thing I cannot believe this.
Contacted the CDC and I asked them, did you do blood workups on all the people that you claimed were included in the AIDS figures from day one? The answer was no.
No, they didn't.
About 25% of those figures were based upon symptoms. Then I said,
yeah, a presumed diagnosis of
That's
HIV. That was just like,
and I said, but if you're presuming it's HIV, hence AIDS, you must presume then that you have a gold standard that nothing else could have caused the same symptoms. And I said, there are at least 7 other...
friendly phone.
Yeah. And I said, there are at least 7 other diseases that have the same identical symptoms of AIDS, such as tuberculosis and malaria, and also cytomegalovirus in its advanced stage, and tertiary syphilis. And I was going through some of the diseases I had found that have this, and they kind of shrugged their shoulders and didn't address the issue at all. They just avoided it. Then I asked them about Africa, and I said, no. And in this documentary, there's 5 countries in Africa that have, that you will see where doctors who've spent much of their life in Africa, their whole life as professional physicians in Africa, haven't seen a single case of AIDS.
Right. No, the African thing is a big joke. I mean, it's a bad joke, but it is a joke.
In the epicenter, they're saying, yes, we have malaria and we have TB, and they're not being treated because we're not getting any money, and it can be prevented and we could cure these people. We don't have fresh drinking water. They're drinking, and you'll see in the film, people drinking right out of septic water.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'll see human debris right on the water. They scoot it aside and drink the water. And then they get parasites and they get diarrhea. Well, if you drank out of infected feces water, you're going to get diarrhea and you're going to get tuberculosis in that environment, and you're malnourished.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a dry, non-productive cough, lose about 10% of your body weight, and you're going to be classified as AIDS.
Right.
And he says, but if we give money for AIDS, then suddenly you'll see these new cars driving through the highways here with loads of condoms and pamphlets, but not a single antibiotic to help anyone with tuberculosis.
The World Health Organization has totally messed up. So, I mean, following the lead of the NIH, and those things. The article I read, this article about, it was a year ago, I think, in Nature, that just, I could not believe that it was in there. It had about 10 or 15 doctors with their names on it. They studied the prostitutes in some little Eastern African country right above Liberia. I forgot the name of it. It's a coastal country. They had gone there 5 years before and found that 75% of the prostitutes were HIV positive. They predicted if they came back in 5 years, half of them would be dead. Right? So they come back in 5 years, and there's no bodies to count. There's no dead prostitutes to do autopsies on. They're still HIV positive according to their tests, which there's cross-reactivity with all kinds of things. And their conclusion in the paper was that when that should have told them right there, I said, wait a minute, HIV doesn't seem to be hurting these people. The conclusion was these people have got this is in Nature, a special strain of HIV, which, number 1, does not cause any disease. Number 2, it protects you from the strains that are rampant throughout Africa that do cause disease. And we ought to study these people further because we might be able to develop a vaccine out of this. That was published in Nature. And it is on its face. I mean, even a 6th grader, I think, looking at the logic there, would say, wait a minute, these guys, the emperor has no clothes here. There's something serious wrong with the mind of these people. You know, they come in with a conclusion, and they just won't ever examine it. They don't, and when they see direct evidence that their conclusion is wrong, they just make up some ridiculous thing like that. And the WHO gives them money to come back there, and they probably have nice hotels on the beach there. But and doctors like to go on little vacations to collect blood, things like that, which don't take a lot of time, and then take it back home and study it for all year. And they've been fooling us. They know, the people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of the, I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH to say, here's the progress we've made. And the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, You know, I'd looked through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. And that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist. You want your work to be associated with you, especially if it's got to do with something that's so important in the world that they're spending billions of dollars on it. We ought to know who was it that should get credit for pointing out to us that HIV was the probable cause of AIDS. And probable is not a very powerful word, but there is no such person. There is no paper, there's no group of papers. They can say, well, it's in there somewhere, but it's not in there somewhere.
Gallo couldn't find it for you?
Gallo wouldn't talk to me, but Montagnier couldn't find it for me. Montagnier said, why don't you, first they say, look at the CDC report. Okay, they're talking about the bulletin of mortality and morbidity that comes out every couple of weeks. That's not a scientific publication in the sense of here's the data, here's the arguments, here's the conclusions. That's just a little thing that goes to doctors and say, when you see somebody come into your office with this kind of symptoms, you report it to us because it's possibly this or that kind of thing. It's not a scientific thing.